to go. All right. Please join me in welcoming Kim Hodges. He is the Director of Digital Accessibility for USC and will be taking us through today's workshop. So please welcome Kim, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for coming. I'm going to try and keep this as not boring as possible. For me, it's obviously a topic I could speak about for hours upon hours. So just starting off, because I don't know what everybody's familiarity is with digital accessibility, I'm going to tell you what digital accessibility is. There's some common misconceptions around this digital accessibility and what it applies to and what it entails. The general concept is basically that digital accessibility is the ability of anyone, including those with disabilities, to be able to access, perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with anything in a digital format. That can include, and this is where there are common misconceptions. A lot of people think digital accessibility only applies to websites. That is not accurate. It applies to any digital medium. So whether it's a website, a web platform, a piece of software, a digital document, video in digital formats, those all encompass what is considered the domain of digital accessibility. So digital accessibility also applies to everyone that has any kind of a disability. That's another common misconception, is people think it only applies to users with hearing impairments that need captioning, or individuals with visual impairments who have to use screen readers. It applies to anyone with a disability, whether it's speech disability, cognitive, neurological, physical disabilities as well. So when we do testing for digital accessibility on different areas, we test all of those areas. We test cognitive, we test physical, we test auditory and visual as well. And then we also try to accommodate a lot of standards that apply to people with different types of learning disabilities, which can also be included in some of this as well, to make things like processing disorders and stuff like that, make it easier for them as well. But one of the greatest things through my career that I've experienced is whenever we've increased the accessibility of any of the digital environments, it's been impactful to individuals without disabilities as well. I'll give you an example. I worked for a company, this is probably 8 years ago, 10 years ago, pretty close to. And we built a learning management system from the ground up, something like Blackboard, except for it was our own incarnation. And once we started to integrate digital accessibility into a lot of the functionality, we started hearing from students that weren't registered with the Disability Resource Office or hadn't identified as having a disability, and stating that they enjoyed the user experience a lot more with a lot of the changes that we've made. So that's another great aspect of digital accessibility that doesn't get talked about a lot, is that it's advantageous to everyone, not just people with disabilities. So where does all of this drive for digital accessibility come from? Well, there's a couple of places. One is it's just the right thing to do. That's why I got into the work. Just a little background on myself. I was actually classified as blind for 7 years due to a rare autoimmune disorder. I was lucky enough to be able to go into remission for that and get a lot of my sight back. But when that happened, I was actually in college. And so I had to learn to adapt to the university that I was going to at the time. This was a long time ago. So accessibility was still just kind of on the outskirts of people's acknowledgement or understanding. I know the university I went to specifically had never even really heard of it. And that's how my career got started. Is I was kind of a self-taught software engineer before I went back to school, and worked with their IT and communications departments to not only make my online learning experience better, but to make access to services through the university, through their websites and all of that better. And it just kind of steamrolled from there. I've worked with a total of 25 universities across the United States. I've worked with 5 outside of the United States on everything from starting a digital accessibility program to just remediating what they had existing, whether it was websites or web platforms or different things like that. So I have a very personal attachment to this. I've gone through some of the things that people that meet these barriers have gone through and realize how frustrating it can be if you can't get access to things that you need. So that's the right thing to do. There's also there's a federal law and state mandates and things like that as well. I'm not going to harp on that for a long time, but just for awareness, most people have heard of the Americans with Disability Act. There are titles underneath that. Digital accessibility has kind of been lumped in with some of the physical accessibility titles. And there have been court cases that have been fought basically in the interest of individuals with disabilities to make things more accessible for them. And there is a recognized standard, which is called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Everything under that ADA law is kind of held to that particular standard. There's also, and we deal with this, but we don't as much. There's also Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act that also has very clear guidelines for any type of digital communication or presentation or learning environment when it comes to education or government specifically. So that's another reason I try not to use the legal route if I can avoid it, because ultimately I do just think it's the right thing to do and it's beneficial for everyone. So before I move on, does anybody have any questions? Oh, we got a hand up.
Hey, Kim, this is Robert. How does digital disability work with maybe people who have invisible disabilities?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So when we're talking about a university environment, I'm going to call it the old school way of thinking was that we only had to accommodate people that were registered with like the SDRC we have here at U of SC. That federal mandate and federal law, as well as state mandates that are in individual states, apply that a lot more broadly. So the expectation now is when we're talking about WCAG and the application of that web content accessibility guidelines, it's supposed to accommodate everyone, whether they identify as having a disability or not. So that would include people with invisible disabilities. That's what we're pushing for here at the university, is that there's a general state of accessibility, whether someone identifies as having a disability or not. And just to dive a little bit further into that, there's also a section of the Americans with Disability Act where you can't legally force someone to identify as having a disability. It's called forced identification. And you don't have to, you legally can't do that. So someone can have a disability and choose not to register with the SDRC or not identify outwardly as having a disability, but we're still, by law, and in my opinion also because it's the right thing to do, we're still required to have a certain level of adherence to accessibility for those individuals as well. Hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions before I continue on? Okay. So now we're going to talk about, now that we know what digital accessibility is, we know who it applies to, and we know what the laws are and the reasoning behind it. We're going to talk about how does this actually apply. I am generally used to giving these kinds of talks to developers and things like that. So if at any point I get a little overly technical, please just let me know. I have tried to tailor this to the audience as much as possible, so I will try to keep it simple from a technical aspect. But one of the things, especially if you're in instructional environments, there's a lot of aspects that have become more digitized and have become more online. And COVID-19 really kind of brought that to a head, with a lot of things having to be changed over to online mediums or online platforms. to be able to facilitate continued learning. So with that, we have things, and I'm sure some of you are very familiar with this. We have documents, PDFs, Word documents, Excel documents, even Google documents that are all in digital formats. There is an expectation that those meet a certain criteria when it comes to accessibility. Now, we don't have the time for me to teach you how to make all of those things accessible today, but there will be an email that's going out with some resource links specific to things like PDFs, Word documents, and so on and so forth. But basically, the concept behind that is, I know when I was visually impaired, I actually preferred to get things in digital formats, even if they weren't 100% accessible, because I could, which is kind of a misnomer, but even if they weren't to a certain level of accessibility from my perspective, because generally speaking, it was a lot easier. Trying to get Braille was almost impossible for just about anything. So when we're talking about digital documents, there are steps and tools that can be used to assist you. Microsoft has an accessibility checker built right into it for Word documents. And then Adobe, if you're using Adobe Acrobat Pro DC, sorry, that's a long name, that also has a built-in accessibility checker. So those checkers, they are a big help. They aren't without fault. So I don't want to make them sound like they're going to be the savior for everyone. There are positives and negatives to each one. The Adobe one, if you're doing simple things, it actually works quite well. But if you have to do anything a little more complex, sometimes you do have to read up on it a bit. Word is similar, just with some different issues associated with it. But one of the great things is when you're talking about whether it's a Word document or a PDF, something that you'll hear a lot about if you read up on digital accessibility or not is something called alt text, alternative text. Images are something that have been kind of the bane of existence for a lot of people. Adobe is subscription based. Yes, that's correct. So the images are, there's even still to this day debate about how images should be handled from an accessibility perspective when it comes to documentation. So that's what I'm going to spend a little bit of time on today. So both the Windows checker as well, are not the Windows, the Microsoft Office checker, as well as the Adobe Acrobat Pro DC checker, both have the ability to tag images with alternative text. So I'm going to be doing a demonstration a little bit later with a screen reader, and I'll kind of show you how a screen reader handles alt text so you can kind of hear it live and get an understanding of why that's important. But one of the big discussions is there's two classifications, two primary classifications for images when it comes to documents or websites or anything like that, as they relate to images. There's what we call non-informative, or decorative is another word that's used, and then there's informative. The non-informative or decorative images are the ones that can get a bit confusing for people at times. The standard is on WCAG, if it's a decorative image, which that means that it doesn't provide any necessary information to the document. It's literally, like, I use an example. If you're writing a particular paper and you use images to break up the paragraphs, and it's just a simple bar, that's a decorative image. It doesn't provide any contextual information. But if you have an infographic that you're posting as an image, or a chart or a graph, those are informative. So there needs to be some kind of alternative text for those. So when we're talking about simplistic images, you might have a paper that you wrote and you have a photo of yourself up there. And you want that photo identified so that they know as they interact with the photo who the author of the paper is. For that one, it's a simple, you would just provide alternative text through one of those tools that would have your name. So if I was the one writing the paper, it would say Kim Hodges, and that's all you would have to put. So when a screen reader interacts with that image, all that would be read out is Kim Hodges. When you get into more complex images that are like graphs and charts and things like that, there are, which we won't get into them today, but no, there are multiple different options on how to address that. Frequently, if you're talking about like an infographic or something that's a bar graph, something where it's providing a lot of visual information and data to support that, that can be difficult sometimes to put in those little alt text tags because you generally want to keep those to at maximum 2 sentences. You want to keep them to a maximum of 2 sentences. Generally, the shorter, the better. So if you're providing, statistical analysis for the last 10 years on, say, enrollment rates amongst different populations, that's a lot of information to present in an image. So that small alt text isn't going to suffice. But there are alternative methods, and one of the resource links that they'll be sending out has a lot of information on how to address that specifically. Um, One of the things I like to use is think about it like a textbook. When you have a figure in a textbook, generally speaking, there is text information under that figure that tells you what's in that figure. And you can do the same thing in documents or on web pages when it comes to images. That's one of the ways to provide that alternative text. So, like I said, I'm not going to go massively in depth into this because it'll eat up a lot of time, but that's one of the big things. So, I'm going to kind of stop there before I move on to the next point and see if anybody has any questions. All righty. So, moving on to the next point. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the different digital media formats, specifically video. This is another one that gets a lot of attention because of captioning and transcription and when captioning and transcription are appropriate. Um, I'm a little hardcore. I think all videos should be captioned, no matter what. Um, the only time that maybe you might not caption them is if there is no speaking in them whatsoever. They're entirely visual, but that's very rare that that happens. So, um, and even in those instances, someone might want to know what kind of music is playing in that video or what kind of sounds are being represented, and captioning can do that as well. Um, so that's my general rule of thumb: is all videos should have captioning on them. I understand, and I've had conversations throughout the university about captioning and the undertaking that is involved in captioning. Whether it's you try to do it yourself or you hire someone outside of the university to do it for you. An example is we have some departments that have arrangements with certain vendors that will actually caption videos for them. Um, but there are methods that you can use that they're not 100% foolproof, but like how we're using Teams today. We're using Teams live captioning really isn't that bad comparatively to other tools that are out there. But then since we're recording this after the fact, I can actually upload this video into Microsoft's specific hosting that they have for sharing videos, and that will actually create a transcript for me. Then what I can do is I can go in, look through the transcript, see if there's errors and fix them, and then basically upload that same transcript into the video. And so now we've got live captioning and we've got a transcript for the video as well. So it's somewhat time intensive, but it's not nearly as bad as trying to just hand transcribe everything. There is some automation that assists you with that, but the university does have tools like Teams. Zoom has some ability to modify captions depending on how you have Zoom set up. But we do have some internal options to allow not only for live captioning, but for creating transcripts as well around videos, or even live presentations like we're doing right now, that are a lot better than what we used to have. So now, kind of on that same vein, YouTube videos, which I know get used a lot. There will also be a link that's sent out on how to make sure your captions are good in a YouTube video, how to set up the auto caption feature, and then how to modify or upload your own captions into YouTube videos. I will say YouTube's live captioning has gotten better over the years, but it's still a little rough. A lot of it depends on the individual speaking, whether there's any kind of accent or change in intonation in their voice. Um, I watch a lot of YouTube, and I'll tell you sometimes the live captions are real bad, and sometimes they're pretty good. So if you are using YouTube videos for either you're using existing YouTube videos or you're uploading something to YouTube to share that as, to whether it's to students or other individuals, that link that I sent out will have a lot of additional information on how you can modify the captions, how you can upload your own captions and create transcripts and things like that through YouTube. So now that I've kind of covered that, I'm going to open it up to additional questions if anybody has any. Yes, question.
Hi, I just thank you so much for this. As part of the larger deaf community, someone with an auditory processing disorder, I really appreciate this. As you were saying, yes, it's really useful to use things like Microsoft Stream, where you can put the video just right in there, and that's available to all of us. I wanted to mention as well that a part of digital accessibility is also appearing on screen so that people can see you speak, which is really useful. And thank you so much for doing that. A lot of us, when we give our lectures, if we're recording them for video purposes, we may not necessarily have a video of ourselves speaking, and it can be incredibly useful to people, especially when the closed captions are not, or the live captioning may not necessarily get everything perfectly correct. That plus the lip reading really does help people. And I'm so I'm excited to hear that the campus has or is working towards having some people or services available for when we need live captioning during a talk or something like that. But I asked the provost for this when we were going through the height of COVID, and people were going in mass, and we were having people show up, and they needed me as the director of a program to be on campus to see these things. I asked if they could provide me with captioning, and they were like, "This is something we do for the students, but we'll look into it for you." So it wasn't really something that they we're going to do for faculty or staff. So I'll just say that.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for bringing up the point about lip reading. That's one that is easy to miss and forget about. And I'm happy to do this. And my goal is students, yes, that's the reason we're all here. And we want to make sure that students are accommodated and that they have everything that they need. But if we're doing that, there's no reason we can't make that stuff available to everybody else. That's my goal is faculty and staff, as well as students, all have what they need. The SDRC does a great job working with students, but then everybody else kind of gets left by the wayside. And when they hired me, that's part of my job, is making sure that not only are we making things accessible for the students, but that everything internally is accessible as well. Just a couple of notes about that. I sit on a couple of different boards. One is called the Technical Review Board, and that board is about anything digital that gets purchased for the university. It gets put through an accessibility check before we sign off on it. So those are steps that we're making, and we're building the program. And I just got the thumbs up to hire 2 additional people. So hopefully this is just going to continue to grow, and we'll have a lot more access to services for everybody, not just the students. So thank you for that. Robert.
Yeah, I was just wondering, grad students, if we're GTAs, we don't get taught any of this. I'm the instructor of record for my class, and I try really hard for my lab to make the teaching great. I did not know about any of these digital tools or any of these challenges. Um, what's being done to make sure that the GTAs come in really know how to do this at the department level? Not only is it not in our handbook, but we don't even have any templates or any information. Short of these kinds of talks, I would never know about it. And I'm doing a disservice to my students by not knowing this. So I don't know what can be done, but I'm kind of upset my department didn't talk to me about this.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And you bring up an awesome point about the populations that aren't getting this information. And grad students are one of those populations. I will say, yeah, faculty doesn't get this as much as they should either, and we're working on that. The CTE is doing some awesome stuff. I've had several meetings with the faculty senate in multiple different incarnations, whether it's the IT faculty senate or the general faculty senate, to talk about digital accessibility. We have a new president that actually values um, accessibility in general, as well as, on this particular level. I literally was just in a call, a town hall that we had in IT earlier today, and it was awesome. I heard the president say the word accessibility way more times than I expected, which was awesome. So I I'm not going to misrepresent and say that we're in perfect shape, because we're not, but we're on our way there. We're building those blocks to get there. Talks like this is one way. We're trying to get more formalized training set up. Actually, the 2 employees that I got uh, fast tracked to be able to hire, they're actually going to be, part of their responsibilities will be creating. We have a digital accessibility website at the university, but it's pretty basic right now. Part of my goal with that particular site is to expound on it a lot and create a lot of very targeted training and guideline material about specifically what you were talking about, for educational instructional purposes. Have things for faculty, for grad students, for staff that applies directly to them. To have a section also for resources, who to reach out to if you need help, who can provide what kind of help, because we do have people across the campus that can help. We've got the CTE, Aisha, and I talk to Aisha pretty frequently. We have a lot of interactions. We also have Rob Grookett as part of the distance ed, our distance learning team. They actually have a lot of really good knowledge around different areas of accessibility, especially what we're talking about around documents and video captioning and transcription. So those are other resources. The SDRC, Dow Hammond, who is actually in this, is very knowledgeable. And so um, that our goal is to be able to provide you with necessary information, as well as the resources for things that might not be covered or that are maybe a little more difficult to suss out through a guide or a training. So we are working on that, but I'm glad you brought that up about the grad students, because I'm going to specifically have some conversations after this about how we can address that and make sure that grad students are aware of this as well, for when they're actually teaching courses and they're the instructors, because I think that's super important and valuable.
Yeah, thank you so much, because I know I personally would benefit from this as well, since I have a disability, but it's not taught, and I spent maybe a couple hundred hours this summer redoing my course, but at no point did I even realize that it was about accessibility. I'm just kicking myself because halfway, we're in October now, and now I'm just learning. It's just like, come on. I could have done this over the summer and made it better for everybody. So I really hope those conversations happen, and I'd love to help instigate anything in the geography department. Anything I could do to help, I'd love to.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much. We can always use advocates, and people helping communicate this message as well. I still find that with the university this large, there's still areas where awareness is lacking. So I appreciate that. All right, so we've got some things coming in about PowerPoint. Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate it. I will probably reach out to you after this, both of you, and I'm always putting together committees and different things like that. So it would be great to have some members of the academic community on some of those. I don't know of any place where you can specifically, there might have been a resource at one time. I don't know if there still is. And this is maybe something someone from the CTE might know more about than I do. As far as I know right now, there's not any place you can send like a PowerPoint or any other file and have someone make them accessible for you. Yeah, the built-in tools are actually quite helpful. Yes, it does. The integrated tools can miss some things. You don't want to rely 100% on those, but I will say if you run them through, those checkers, you're going to be a lot further along in terms of accessibility than if you don't. That is a huge thing, is you will have at least some semblance of accessibility built in if you use the checkers and the integrated tools. I know with PowerPoint, one of the hardest things with PowerPoint is read order, because there's a lot of technical stuff around it, but because of the way PowerPoint interprets the individual slides when you're working through with something like a screen reader, read order can be tricky. But if you have alt text covered, if you have some of the navigational cues, which are all done as part of that checker, covered, it takes you a lot further. You can also have some awareness around what the read order for those slides is. So again, it sounds like it might be beneficial to have individual trainings on some of this stuff. So that's something we could talk about. Providing is, specifically how to work some of these things and how to do them. This is kind of a kicking off point. So, and I know members of the CTE are very knowledgeable about some of this stuff as well. And so is members of the SDRC for, student specific issues around this stuff. So any other questions before I kind of move on? These are great also. Your questions and the comments and all of that are fantastic. So I want to applaud everybody for being involved.
Hey, Kim, this is Casey. So Joshua asked about use for university access to OtterBox. Are you familiar with that?
Sorry, I had a blip there. Yes, I am familiar with OtterBox. There's actually multiple tools like that will help you with the captioning. I have had conversations with the university about trying to get some kind of an enterprise solution for captioning. There's multiple different tools out there. I know the library, they are using a specific tool currently to help them with captioning, and they had to pay for it. And I was actually part of the selection committee for that. There's individualized services. There's like Rev and 3Play Media, and then tools like OtterBox and Tront is another one. There's quite a few out there, but as of right now, we don't have an enterprise solution. We're working on that. I've had conversations with some of the Unite members that are, IT professionals within the academic units, about how we can maybe all pool our resources together to get something. Because I know like the CLC is using something different, and there's a lot of money being spent on this, but if we could all pool it together and get an enterprise solution, that would be great. Currently, we don't have anything like that though. All right, awesome. So time check here. Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to do now is, because the screen reader demo that I'm going to do, that takes a bit of time, and then I want to allow questions at the end. So if you want to vamp a little bit, I'm going to switch laptops real quick. All right,
I think Kim is back.
I am. I apologize for the quality of this webcam versus my other one. So, all right. So I am going to forewarn everyone, if you have any kind of audio triggers, this might be a little difficult to listen to. I'm going to be doing a screen reader demonstration through a Blackboard course. I will wait for the screen reader to finish talking, and then I will make some comments and open it up to questions as well. And just for anyone that's interested, I'm actually using VoiceOver on a Mac today. mainly because it's built right into the Mac. It's something that just comes on all of them, whereas the Windows specific screen readers, you either have to purchase one or the other one is free. It's called NVDA. But I don't, on my main work laptop, which is the other one I was using, I don't have NVDA installed. So so I'm going to kind of jump in. You're going to hear a lot of weird computer talking. So
voiceover on Safari. Content window. Microsoft Teams has new window. Skip to main content. Link. You are currently on a link. To click this link, press Control Option Space.
all right. So starting off, actually having a skip to main link is awesome for screen reader users. Blackboard has it built in. Our main website also has it built in. What this will do is when you activate it, it will actually skip a lot of the top portion of the page and will navigate down into the main content portion of the page. And that can be helpful. So users won't have to navigate through this.
Tim,
Yeah.
you are not currently sharing your screen.
Microsoft
We can
Teams.
hear
Turn
we can
camera
hear it,
and plus
but you
shift.
can't
Turn
see it.
voiceover off.
All right. I had hit the share button, but apparently it didn't activate. So give me 1 second.
Yep,
Is that better?
there you go.
Can everybody see it? See, they were getting the true
Yes.
screen reader experience. They couldn't even see what was happening on the screen. All right. So I will start that again.
Voiceover on Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams call in progress. Teams meeting for digital accessibility. Safari. Previous navigation links. Skip to main content. Link. You are currently on a link. To click this link, press Control Option Space.
So this was the skip to main link that I was talking about. So I'm going to navigate further and just listen and kind of pay attention to the cursor as it moves across the screen to see what it's doing. And then I'll talk a little bit more and then you'll be able to ask some questions as we go.
Previous navigation links. Course navigation. List 5 items. Content, calendar, discussions, gradebook, messages, end of list, end of course navigation. Next navigation link, complimentary. You are currently in a complimentary course. Faculty. Casey Carroll, instructor. Send message to Casey Carroll. Casey Carroll. You are currently on an image. To begin interacting with the contents of this image, press Control Option Shift down arrow.
So this is an example of alt text. This is an image of Casey, and so it literally just reads it out as his name. So I will continue moving on.
Instructor. Send message to Casey Carroll. Link. Gloria Washington. Instructor. Send message to Gloria Washington. Link. Details and actions. Roster. View everyone in your course. Course description. View the course description. Link. Progress tracking. Progress tracking hasn't been turned on for this course. Off. Collaborate from vacant empty group. Blackboard collaborate. Join session. More options for collaborate. Attendance view. Groups view groups to join. Announcements view archive. Books and tools view course and institution tools. End of complimentary. Course content. You are currently on a heading level 2. End of complimentary. You are currently in a complimentary.
So this is, I'll give you, this is an example of something that could be done better. But this is all on, this is stuff that's specific to Blackboard and on a coding level. It's not necessarily anything anybody internally at U of SC would have control over. Complementary isn't necessarily the best label for this. I know if I was a first-time student and I interacted with that, I wouldn't necessarily know what that meant or that I needed to interact with that in a different way. But like I said, that's not something the individual who built this course necessarily did incorrectly. Some of this stuff is just built right into Blackboard, and so there are minimal options we have to change some of this stuff. But I just wanted to point that out.
Course content. You are more information about course progress tracking. Text document. You are welcome to teaching online for text document. You are currently on an image. To begin interacting with the contents of this image, press Control Option Shift down arrow.
So this is an example of something that might not necessarily need a label or an alt text on it. That's the thing with alt text, is a lot of it's frequently up to the interpretation of the individual building or creating the content. Like in this one, this is an image of a quote unquote text document, but it's really just a decorative image. It wouldn't necessarily have to have an alt text on it. That's again, that's where some of the nuances with digital accessibility come in. It's not necessarily bad that it has an alt text, but it doesn't really add anything necessarily.
Welcome to Teaching Online for Graduate Students. Link. This course runs from September 28th, October 25th, 2022. Click here for more instructions on how to navigate this course. You are currently on a text element. Toggle Getting Started. Expand Getting Started. You are currently on a button. Collapse Getting Started.
So I just opened that one up so we can navigate through this a little bit further.
Text document. Online syllables. Link. Text document. Syllables and schedule. Link. Text document. Meet your facilitator. Link. Discussion. Questions about this course. Link. If you have questions pertaining to this course that are not personal in nature, first post your questions here. If you know the answer to a question posed, please respond. Each question will be answered within 24 hours if posted Monday. Your text document. Recommended readings. No more content items to load. Toggle course modules. Expand course modules. You are.
Hey, Kim.
Collapse course modules. Collapse F. Voiceover off.
Yes.
Dow pointed out in the chat that we can't actually see. So you know how you and I were saying that I could see you tabbing on the USC webpage? We can't see you tabbing through Blackboard, just FYI.
Oh, okay. Well, that is actually helpful to know. But also kind of gives you a real screen reader experience, because, you know, obviously if you're someone with a visual impairment that needs to use a screen reader, you're not necessarily going to be able to track where the cursor is at any given moment. A lot of times if I'm doing in-person demonstrations of screen readers, I'll actually make you put on a blindfold and have you try to work through something using a screen reader. It gives you some kind of in-depth understanding of what those particular users experience when they're going through stuff, and how it can at times be confusing. But I apologize that you can't see the cursor. So it's a little difficult to talk through where the cursor is and talk over the screen reader. So I'll kind of stop there for right now on the screen reader demonstration. I'll answer any questions or talk a little bit further, and then I'll actually show you on the website what it kind of looks like, and hopefully you'll be able to see the cursor on there. Does anybody have any questions or comments? All right, well, so like I was talking about earlier, there are actually multiple different screen readers, but there's three major ones. VoiceOver is the integrated one on Mac. It works best with Safari, unfortunately. Because I'm not a huge fan of Safari, but it works best on Safari. It is getting better with Chrome, but it's still a little wonky. Then for Windows, there's JAWS, which is made by a company called Freedom Scientific. That one costs money. You have to pay for it. The user has to pay for it. There's different options. They now offer like a yearly subscription fee, where it used to be that you just had to buy it outright, which you still can do, but now they have a yearly subscription fee. Makes it a little bit more attainable for some people. And then there's NVDA. Without getting into a lot of like real deep tech nerd speak, NVDA, it's fully open source. So it was developed by some very good-hearted people. It actually works quite well, especially considering it doesn't cost anything to use. There are, I will say, and there's people that would argue with me about this, but JAWS and NVDA specifically have pretty steep learning curves. Just to give you an example, if you want to be a JAWS instructor, if you want to be certified as someone who can teach JAWS to other people, the course is 2 years long. which to me is insane. But so there's a lot of intricacies. There's a lot of depth to JAWS. There is as well to NVDA. The reason I'll demonstrate the voiceover on Mac is one, it comes free with a Mac. You also have voiceover if you have an iPhone. iPhones come with it built in. iPads come with it built in. It's not quite as robust as JAWS and NVDA in terms of the functionality and how many different things you can do with them, but it's pretty easy to pick up. There's actually a little training module within when you first activate VoiceOver on your computer. You have the option to take this little training, and it will kind of teach you how to use it, which is great for especially for people that are first-time users or anyone that wants to attempt to use it. And it's just a little more accessible in that regard if you already own Apple products or you already have Apple products. The screen readers that work on your phone or the tablet, they're called the same thing, but they work very differently. VoiceOver for a phone or a tablet, the iPads, it's all touch based. So you tap the screen, you swipe, you do different things like that, and that allows you to navigate through iPhone or the iPad. Android phones have, depending on which phone you have, they have potentially multiple different options. There's TalkBack, which is the Android-based one, and then like Samsung has its own version. I will say none of them are amazing. They can bridge the gap sometimes, but they're not great. There's a lot of technical reasons why the voiceover for the phones and the tablets are better. Part of it's because Apple has a closed ecosystem, so they're like your iPhone's page is always going to be the same. Like the layout's not going to change too much, other than maybe you creating folders. Whereas with the Android devices, there's a lot of variance between manufacturers on what the layout is and how you can adjust and change all of that stuff. So it makes it a little harder to be precise with a screen reader. So if there are no additional questions, I'm going to show you guys the website real quick. Hopefully you can see the cursor, but speak up quickly if you can't, because I don't want to navigate through the whole thing if you guys can't. One thing I will say before I jump into the website, I'm going to be going through U of SC's website. There's not very many issues with U of SC's website. We worked very hard to make our main website meet all of the WCAG 2.1 AA standards for accessibility. There are a few weird things that it does, but for the most part, it's in pretty good shape. But it will give you at least some idea of what a screen reader user comes into contact with when they're dealing with web-based stuff. So give me 1 second. All right. Let me know if it switched over to the main web page.
VoiceOver on Microsoft Teams. Safari. University of South Carolina window. Parents, link for alumni. Fact students, link 1 list 8 items. You are currently on a list. Gateways for. You are currently on a text element. List 8 item students, link, faculty and staff, alumni, link, parents, link, calendar, link, M8 directory, link, give, end of list, search. You are search sc.edu. Search sc.edu. You are go. sc.edu search. You are currently on a button. To click this button, press Control Option Space.
So this is an example of something that it does that's kind of strange. Is when you go into the search box, it actually you have to go through like multiple different clicks before you can actually get to the go portion of the search box. But you can still enter text in and search.
End of search. List 8 items. Study. Link 1. List 8 items. Level 2. Study at South Carolina. Link 1 of 8. Majors and degrees at South Carolina. Link 2 of 8. You are currently on a link. To click this link, press Control Option Space.
All right, so I'm going to select this.
Majors and degrees vertical line University of South Carolina. 90% loaded. 90% loaded. Skip to content. Link. Skip to content. Link. Majors and degrees vertical line University of South Carolina. You are currently on a link inside of web content. To click this link, press Control Option Space. To exit this web area, press Control Option Shift up arrow.
So part of why I want to show you this is just so you can understand just me making that simple switch, right? I clicked the link, it came here. I have not touched the screen reader since the page changed, and that was how much information was read out. Now, if I'm normally navigating on my own and I have an idea of where I want to go, I just skip through a lot of that. I also was telling Casey this, and Dow has some experience with this as well. Generally, when I'm running a screen reader to work on my own, the rate at which the text is read out is much faster than this. To the point where I was telling them I've done demonstrations where I forgot to turn the speed down, and people think that the screen reader software is actually glitching out, which it's not. It's just reading it so fast. But for users who are used to using this every day, all day, you get to a point where you can understand what you're doing, even if it's reading at a very fast rate. But I'm going to activate the skip to content here so you can kind of see what this does. And then I will navigate a little bit faster down here to find something specific.
sc.edu link major at the University of South. Filter yours showing filter by keywords, e.g. writing, fashion, merchandising, etc. Filter by view all, filter by college, menu, check mark, view all. College of Art, Darla School of Business. You are current Darla School of Business showing 30 down pointing black pointer, view all, filter by menu, check mark, B, M, masters, M, showing 6 entries of 120, clear filters, table 5, areas of study, bachelor's, master's, doctorate, other, accounting, bachelor's, B, column 2, master's, M, column 3, doctorate, blank, column 4, other, CD, column 5, business administration, link, bachelor's, blank, column 2, master's, M, column 3, doctorate, D, column 4, other, A, column C, CD. You are currently on a text element inside of a business analytics, bachelor's, master's, M, column 3, bachelor's, blank, column 2, master's, M, column 3, doctorate, blank, column 4. You are currently on a blank inside of a table. F5, voiceover off.
All right, so I'm going to kind of stop right there for right now. The question I want to ask is, so as I was going through the areas of study, for those that were following along, and I'm going to stop sharing for right now. As I was going through the columns, for bachelor's, master's, doctorate, and other, were you able to follow that at all as I was going through? Did it make sense when I was like in accounting, what areas that they had degrees in for bachelor's, master's, doctorate? Did any of that, for those that were following along, did any of that make sense? All right, good. That's awesome to hear. Right. Yes. When it does the M's and the B's and it says them very excitedly. That's good feedback. That was a concern when this was originally developed, that might be difficult to understand. We felt like this might have been one of the better ways to approach it. When we're talking about these kinds of things, and this applies a little bit to the documents that we were talking about earlier, especially when you're talking about like spreadsheets and those kinds of things, columns can be a little tricky sometimes to make them so that the individual can understand them. Just because they can interact with something doesn't mean that it's understandable. And that kind of ties back to that. I've talked about it a couple of times, that web content accessibility guidelines. There are 4 pillars with that. And the pillars are, we call it the POUR method, POUR, and it's perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And now what each one of those means, there's some interpretation involved, but perceivable, that one's a little self-explanatory. Are they actually aware that something's there? Then there's operable. Can they interact with it? Can they move around? Can they navigate? But the one that doesn't get a lot of focus is the understandable one. It's one of the things that we talk about whenever you're building a document, a web page, anything that's going to be presented in a digital format. one of the things you want to think about is the person who consumes this, is the information organized in a way that it all ties together that they can understand it. As educators and people in educational environments, this isn't a new concept to you. It's a little harder to teach developers how to think this way. But for you all, it's kind of a natural inclination. So it's the same way when you're using something like a screen reader or keyboard only navigation, is you want that information to flow in a way that it's understandable. So things like these charts or graphs or these specific, like this areas of study where it's built out into almost like a spreadsheet with columns, you want to make sure that when the person is going through it, that they can understand what these different columns represent, what they mean, what's in them. So that's really the big piece when we're doing anything, is making sure that it's perceivable, that the person knows that something is there, that they can navigate through it and work it. That's the operable part. That it's understandable, so that as they're going through it, the information that they're interacting with, I apologize, makes sense to the individual, that it's something that they can understand the general layout, how the information is presented. And then there's the robust. That one you don't have to worry about as much, because that one's more about what kind of platforms it can work on and those kinds of things. So making sure that like a web page can work on a phone just as easily as it can on a laptop or a desktop computer. That stuff doesn't apply as much to a lot of the informational and educational content that will be created. But we've got about 10 minutes left here, so I'm going to open up the last 10 minutes for questions or discussion, if that's okay, Casey. And feel free to speak out about something you wished was in this, something you wished I talked about more, questions about specific things I talked about, anything like that. Any kind of feedback as well would be great.
This is Robert. I have never seen a speed reader or not a what is this program called? Screen reader. There we go.
Screen reader.
I've never seen or heard a screen reader before. That really hurts the ears. How do people adjust to something like this?
You get used to it. Oh, and let me tell you, they're way better than they used to be. They some of them, JAWS in particular, has different types of voice codecs. I used to use the one that sounded like, does anybody remember Speak and Spells, the toy from the like 70s, where you'd push it and it was a super robotic voice that would read out things to you? That's what that voice codec sounded like. We also, for people who use this all the time, you speed it up a lot. So it's speaking so fast that you're not getting as much in terms of the intonation. So it doesn't, but it does. One thing I will say, and there's been studies done on this, as it's specific to people with visual impairments. People with visual impairments that have to use screen readers on average only retain about 35% of what they interact with. There's a lot of debate on why that is specifically. I have theories, as someone who used a screen reader actively for 7 years, and I still use them all the time. I think part of it is exactly what you were talking about. They're hard to listen to. They do kind of hurt your ears. They also skim through, and longer I listen, the faster I can go. Yes, exactly. But it's also very draining. That's something that I think a part in it too. When I was in my undergrad and I would have a day where I had classes back to back to back. I was taking a full 16 credit course load, and I was just busy, and I was on my laptop all the time. I will tell you, I used to do physical labor when I was in my early 20s, and listening to that screen reader all day would just be brutal, and I would be exhausted by the end of the day. The text to audio functions on browsers, a lot of them are very similar. Like Chrome has something called Vox built into it. The Chromebooks also have it as have it as a screen reader. They all use different voice codecs, and there's a lot of similarity between them. Like for example, I can make my voiceover sound female and Australian if I want. And so there's a lot of different options around that. Some are a little more pleasing to the ears than others. But yeah, it does cause some long-term strain. Oh yes, subtitles and closed captioning, which yes, they are different. That's also something that I could talk about for long periods of time. Actually, yeah, we've only got about 6 minutes left here. Yeah, yeah. I'm definitely going to reach out to you after this, Lauren, and set something up because that I will openly admit that because a lot of my personal experiences are around visual impairments because that's my frame of reference. I do always in terms of any of the work that we do, I always make sure that we're covering the full gamut of disabilities. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking is that actually having someone with a representative voice from the deaf and hard of hearing community would be awesome. Yeah, Joshua, there's actually a lot of resources, and those are some of the information that they're going to be sending out afterwards. Does have information about there. I'm going to actually post an organization in chat here. That is one website that they have a lot of really good information, and then there's this one as well. Both of those, now I'm going to preface, the w3c.org site is very intense. It's very deep, very detailed. Thank you, Casey. Very deep, very detailed. It's also very, very technical. WebAIM provides things in language that's a little easier for people who aren't like deep developers. That maybe you're using a content management system like WordPress or something to build a site. It gives you a lot more information on that. But also, if you Google around, sometimes you can find some really good stuff. Robert, no, I haven't found anything that allows me to change to cool voices. Yeah, W3C. I'm actually a sitting member of W3C. I sit on their WCAG working groups. I sit on 3 of them. One's the education one, one's the silver, which is about the new iterations of WCAG, and then I sit on the ARIA one as well. They are. Screen readers are available in multiple different languages. Transcription, there are some options. Sometimes you have to download things to be able to do it in different languages. I do know that some of the languages that use different types of alphabets, like the Cyrillic alphabet and things like that, those can be a little more complex. If we're talking about like Russian or then some of the like Japanese, the different, whether it's Mandarin or Cantonese, depending on what you're doing. No, we don't have anything internal through the university yet. We will, but we don't currently. If you are using Omni Update to make any websites through the university that are attached to the sc.edu, there is a training you can go through. You have to contact communications. Lori Barnhill is the main person. And there is an accessibility training on how to make sure that any content you're doing in Omni Update meets the particular criteria for accessibility. I will say if you're using Omni Update, that's what our main site is done on, and the accessibility is actually just on a base level. It's actually quite good. Our communications team has kind of locked down Omni Update to the point where you have to almost work to make things not accessible. There are some weird things that can happen. I still work with them on new updates that they do to make sure that it all meets the accessibility standards. But I will say I don't have to typically give them a lot of feedback about areas that need to be fixed. So yes, if it's done through Omni Update, which used to be called OU Campus, if that term is confusing, but there is a training that you can take, and there is a digital accessibility training specific to Omni Update. But for just general web stuff, there's not anything currently. We're, like I said, we're going to, with the website refresh, we're going to be offering a lot more guides and training. Yeah, absolutely. I've had lots of conversations and done a lot of stuff with the university. So you can also, if you do reach out to them, feel free to CC me on it, because I would love to get any additional information about what they're doing specifically internally through the library. All right, we're at 2:30, so